Welcome to the Modern Application Development Screencast. In this short screencast, we'll learn a few interesting things about JavaScript that we can do and also that we can use in our project. Before we start, open the following applications on your Ubuntu desktop so that you can work along with me. A browser, Chrome or Firefox, an editor. I'm using an editor here, but you can use a regular gedit if required. Terminal. I'm using the built-in terminal in Ubuntu. Now let's go back to our project we had done earlier. So I have the same project structure. I'm going to use the same thing. So make a copy of it if you have it locally so you can work along with me. Before we start, JavaScript in itself is a huge ecosystem of language and libraries. Today it's grown much more bigger than just the thing that runs in the browser. There's Node.js which you can run on the server side as well. In this screencast, we're not going to look in detail about any of this. What we're going to do is pick up certain parts of the JavaScript that we're going to use it in the browser on the client side along with our Flask application. So I'm not going to look into the details of the JavaScript. There is a Mozilla site that you can go and read a lot about it and learn the basics of JavaScript. There is a page completely to get started with the JavaScript, including how the variables are described, how the functions are described, how the arrays are described, etc. And you can learn how to build functions, how to loop through the code or array, how to build conditional cases using if else, etc., just like any other language. I'm not going to go through this. Today I'm going to go through three important things, one of which is events. The second one is actually manipulating the document, because we already have a document. How do we manipulate the document using the JavaScript and using fetch API, right? Though we are going to go through all of this, we are not going to go through them as a learning of the language. We are going to go through them as though when we are going to use it. Like we are going to learn by using them in our work. Let's open our project here. So let's see where we had put our JavaScript. If you remember from our previous session, we had two ways of including JavaScript, either adding the JavaScript directly into the HTML document in the header section or linking through an external file. At the latest stages, we had added a custom validation.js, which we had included in the file of our HTML file or a template file that we could directly use. Let's start our application and add a new functionality, right? Let's go back here. I've started the server already. Let's open. Here it is. Let's add a functionality called feedback, okay? Where any user can give feedback to our website by giving their email ID, a subject, and a feedback content. Let's add a form for feedback, right? That we can start by adding a template called feedback. Okay, and also we'll add the thank you page. After we submit the feedback, we want to show thank you, so we'll add another template called thank you. Right, so we'll fill up this. Before we fill up this, we'll just write the controller. Let's go back to the controller. Let's write a feedback controller, right? It will be much more simpler and straightforward. So I'm going to copy paste here and show what is going to happen. Here's our controller which handles both get and post at the /feedback. When there's get, it will show the feedback.html. When it post, we are not actually doing anything. We could save the values in the database, etc., etc. I'm not going to do that. but I'm just going to show you thank you to the user. There is this underscore here, dash here, so let's make it dash here, right? Okay, shouldn't matter as long as the names are matching, it's correct. So we have done this. Now we have to create a form, right? Let's create a feedback. What we said is we'll collect the user's email, get a subject line, and we'll get a feedback content, right? So I'm just going to add that contents for it so that it becomes easier for us to move ahead. And I explain to you. It's a simple template. Here it is. What's happening here is, leave this part, I'll just explain to you later. So I'm removing it. So I'm adding a template, feedback.html. Within the template, I have all the other details. The title, I'll give it as feedback, and main header is also feedback. Then it takes email, takes subject, and it takes feedback. Feedback is of text area because they contain a lot of text, and then subject is subject, and we want their email. So this is set up. So if you look at /feedback, so you can see that we have email, subject, and feedback, right? Now there is a extra attribute that I've added here called required and required and required. This is to make sure that these fields are required fields. Like, let's remove that first and see what happens, and then we can add it back. Right now, what happens? I'll reload it, for example, and as soon as I click send, it submits. Something is happening. Okay, it's going here and coming back to thank you. Thank you doesn't have anything, so it's not showing anything. Let's add some content to thank you page. Just say thank you, right? So let's go back to feedback. If I click on send, it just says thank you. Now there's a problem here that it's submitting even though the user has not entered anything. Now we can handle this two ways. After he submits, we can check in the controller whether form has values. If the form doesn't have values, then we can throw error. For example, let's say form email equal to form of email, and then we can compare this. We can compare email is equal to null or empty and throw an error page, or go back to feedback page showing an error, all of that. But we can also do that in the front end. It's important always to do both in front end and back end. Now I'm going to show it to you how do we do it in the front end using JavaScript. Right? Let's go back to our form HTML, which is in feedback. Now how do we make this required field to fill up? We can just give the attribute required in HTML5. That will make this field compulsory to be filled up, right? It's as simple as that. If I make this, okay, now if I send submit, it shows please fill this field. If I fill that, then click, it shows please fill this field. If I click that and there's nothing filled here, so I have to fill something and then submit, and then it goes. Now this is one way of validation. We could have also done in another way, but let's say we want to validate the email. There's no 100% way of validating an email because email has like thousands of patterns. Let's assume an email contains an @ symbol. Like for example, kk@kk.com is a valid email, but just kk without @ symbol is not a valid email. Let's assume that. Now we want to do that kind of validation both in front end and back end. Now let's see how it's done in the front end and not in the back end. What we can do here is we can capture the event. Now is when we are going to learn about event. Now when you click on send, it has what it does a form submission. If you inspect, let's do a submission once more, go back, and when you click on send, you can see that it does a submission post. So we can actually stop this submission, do some validation, and then if the submission doesn't go through well or the validation fails, then we can stop the submission, or we can go ahead with the submission. To do that, we can add a event called onSubmit. On submit, we can call a function. Let's say we are going to call a function called validate, which will validate, and it will receive event which raises this as the parameter to that function. Now, where are we going to write this function? We could actually write it here in the top, in the script here, right? We could write it here, but we could also write it in an external file where we have all the other validations. So we could reuse the thing. So we're going to write it in custom validation, or or custom.js. Either way is fine. Just rename one of them. I'm going to rename this as custom.js, right? And I've included that already here. It should match. It's in the JS folder. It's in the custom under the static folder. Static folder, JS folder, custom.js. Now I already had a validate form function. I'm not going to use that. I'm going to create a new function called validate. Right? Functions are created by using the keyword function and validate. And I'm going to pass event to it and write some validation inside it. Now I'm going to just copy paste a function and then explain it to you what's going on inside. Here. Okay. Like we already know, we can get the value of the email ID by actually getting the element by ID. You could also get by name or get by tag and then filter it through. But I'm here getting by email by ID. So ID is email. Let's double check whether the ID is email here in the feedback. Okay. ID and name both are email. So that's correct. And then get the value of it and check if the value contains my @ symbol. If it contains @ symbol, it will return a non-1 value. And then it goes to this place and returns true. So the submission goes through. If it doesn't contain @ symbol, then the v.index of art becomes -1. Then I'm going to stop the current event, which is a submit event, and then send an alert saying enter a valid email and then return false. All right. So let's see how this works. Right. Say KK. I'm not going to give art symbol. Thank you for a great article. Right. Now if I click on send, it says that enter a valid email ID, and then it doesn't do any submission. Submission is stopped and we still remain on the same page. This is like exactly done in the client. Now if I add something, gmail.com. Okay. Now if I click, it submits, and you can see that it has submitted the value and we are received on the server side. So this is how we do like some validation on the client side. One thing it's very important to remember is it's not just enough to do client side validation. Usually client side validations are done just to give a quick response to the user. You don't want to go all the way to the server and check something and then come back and show him an error saying something is wrong, please enter, because that takes a lot of time and waste of time and resources. That's why we do client-side validation. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do server-side validation. We should always do server-side validation too. So what we would do, we can once we check here, we also have to go on the server side, which is in controller, and write our validation here, and then do all your checks and thing, and instead of sending the thank you page, if there are errors, send back to feedback.html with errors. Easiest way would be to let's say if email dot contains at, then do nothing, else have an error saying enter a valid email, and then send it back to the feedback HTML with error is equal to error, right? And in this first case, error could be nothing, empty, right? It could be empty or it could be nothing. It may not be filled up properly, right? So it could be just filled up, or it could be none, right? And then you can check in your for example, let's go back to feedback and check if there are error messages. You can show it somewhere. I am can have a div. You can put an if else clause, just like how we write this for loop, we could always write an if else clause, right? Right. Okay. This if error, then print the error. Otherwise, it's okay. You sometimes you may not even have to check it. If it's empty, you can just print it like that. Let's see what happens. In this case, just for checking, I'll remove the client-side validation. It's always written true, right? Anyway, we can check the other way. Okay, let's restart. It's restarted. Okay, let's enter. Click on send. So you can see that now I've done the backend validation, entered a valid email. Ideally, we should do both backend and frontend. Just because somebody switches off the JavaScript on their frontend side, or does some manipulation in the JavaScript console to disable this specific function, then it shouldn't happen that it gets submitted to your backend and the backend fails to validate, right? That's why we need to do both side validation. Okay, let's go back and enable this. So now we are doing both front end and backend validation. Similarly, we can do many other validation. Let's say you're taking a username which shouldn't have a space, or it should have alphanumeric characters, etc., etc. You could do all those validations in front end as well as in the back end. This is a very important usage of JavaScript. Now you learn to write function. You learn how to handle a event. There are many events. I just showed one on submit. You can go to JavaScript events page and learn about events, right? And there is lots of event for each on button clicks and on text changes and stuff. You can do many client-side manipulation using those events. I would suggest you to go through this page and learn about minimal events functions that is required for you to use for validation or any client-side manipulation. This is one. Now I want to add another functionality where in the articles page, right, I want to have an icon that when you click you can submit like a rating, right? When the rating, let's say you have a thumbs up or a thumbs down rating, here we're just going to do thumbs up so that any user can do a rating. Now when you actually click on thumbs up, you have to do a form submission and the page reloads. In this case I really don't want to do page reloading. I just when a user clicks up icon, I want the submission to happen in the backend in what we call an AJAX way, and the response to come back and show a response to user without actually reloading the whole page. And I want to show how to do that. And we are going to use something called fetch API to do the backend submission, and also use something called content manipulation to show the message back to the user, right? Let's see how to do it. For the first thing that I want to do is in articles pages, I want to show an icon here somewhere to rate the thing. Let's say on the title, just after written by, I want to, let's say, show an icon here, right? Say rate this, or let's say like this article, right? And I want to show thumbs up icon. I want to show thumbs up icon using what we call bootstrap icons, right? Let's search for bootstrap, right? Bootstrap icons. We can use this bootstrap icon to show all our icons very quickly and easily. Since we already know how to use bootstrap and we have been using bootstrap, I think it's much easier to do using that. Now let's add an icon symbol by adding the icon, right? That is done by adding a class here. This is the one I want to show, and that's done by adding the class. So let's add that class. This is the exact code that we need to do, right? Adding a class by hand thumbs up, right? So let's add that and see how it looks. Now to show this icon, we have to include like icons CSS. I'm just going to include directly, not through local but through a CDN. Right here. Let's load this page. Yes. So here it is. You can show the icon here everywhere. Now I want to do something when the user clicks on this icon. I want to do a form submission, and I want to do send the data to the backend and actually show a response back to the user. To do that, let's write the controller first. Let's call it like an article, right? Much easier to do. Just going to copy paste parts of it and modify it. Okay. So here I have a router called article like, and it takes article ID as part of the URL, and then takes both get and post. Actually I just need get, but it's fine. And then I'm just printing article ID currently, and I'm just returning OK 200. I'm not returning any response as such except for OK, but most importantly I'm sending 200 back. Here what I could have done is, I can get the username, I can get your article ID and then insert into database. If I had a table called article ratings, then I can insert into that table. Currently I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to print here, let's say article. Okay, I'm just going to print it. I'm not going to send anything to the database, but you could create a database and store it in database. Like I'm just going to leave a note here. Right, if you store it, it will be like an increment, and you could also show it along with the article title. The rating of the article is 5, 10 likes, 30 likes, 50 likes, 100 likes, like that. But currently I'm just going to stop it here. Now we need to submit to this endpoint, right? To submit to this endpoint, what we should do is we should do something on the click of this icon. So we should do something on the click of this icon, right? We could do that in two ways. Let me just write the first one. So here we could just write on click. I'm just going to right. So let's refresh this, and when I click this, it says do something, right? It's the same thing here, right? Now you could do it this way, or you don't have to do it this way. You also do it in a centralized way, right? Using another JavaScript function, which is very useful. So what I'm going to write is I'm going to remove this function, it's not useful. I'm going to write a generic function called initialize. I'm not going to take anything into it, and initially I'm going to copy paste and then explain what's happening inside it, right? Okay, I'm actually taking the rating icon here. What is it called? It's called thumbs up fill icon, right? So we can just take that only. The class name. So query.selector_all is a function in JavaScript which will give you all the items or all the nodes in the document based on the query we give here. Here we are giving class name. So the class name should match here. So the class name here, what we've used here is, by class all hand thumbs up fill. That's the class name we are given. And that's the one, when you do the dot and call it, it will give you all those buttons. But I really don't want to use this generic name because there could be other, rating thumbs that are used. So I'm just going to add a, dummy class name and use that just to make sure that, we are selecting only these and nothing else, right? So what is that name I'm going to give is, I'm just going to give a name called ratings icon. It's not a style that we have built or anything. It's just a class name that we're going to give to recognize this, right? I'm going to go use that. Now I'm sure that this is the class that has our rating buttons or like buttons. Just going to leave it as rating buttons, since it has the rating icon, right? Now we've got all the icons. Like if you use it 1 2 3 4 5 6, we can just check it. Like for example, inspect element, you can go to console and you can just run this. can see that it has 5 elements or 6 elements for 6 articles, right? Now for each of them, I want to attach an event. What event we want to attach is a click event, right? We want to attach a click event and do something about it, right? So that will be straightforward. I'll iterate through each of these using for loop. Since it's just a list, I'm iterating through them using for loop, getting each one of them, rating button, off rating buttons, iterate through them. Each one has a rating button. Now each rating button on click, I want to do something, right? On each rating button on click, it's an event. Instead of mentioning it there in the HTML, I'm mentioning it here. I'm just doing send rating or send liking, right? So now this send rating is a function, right? You can attach a function to it, right? It's an event, and I'm just going to do alert only here. Right? I'm just going to call it like only, send like. Much easier, so less confusing. Let's call everything like that only, like buttons, like buttons, like button, and here also a like icon, right? Okay. So it's consistent everywhere. So like icons, I'm going to get all the like buttons. Then each like button, on each like button item, I'm going to do a send like to the backend. But currently I'm just alert, send, like, nothing else. Let's see if this is working. Right. Okay. So now it's called not custom validations, but just custom. Right. Okay. Let's just refresh. Setup. Now if I click on this, okay, it seems to be not working. That's because that function is never called. Initialize function is never called. I want to call the initialize function as soon as the document completely loads. So we could actually call it on document load of body or at the end of the body. So I'm just going to call it here like this, right? So that everything is, this is set up once the document is loaded. You could have also done body on document load, but it's okay. We could call it at the end once all of this is created. Then it will call initialize. Initialize will do setup of the events, right? Now let's do this. Click on this second, send like, send like, send like. Okay, now this is working. Right now we want to actually send like to the backend, right? Which means we have to send it to this URL endpoint. Which URL? This URL endpoint, right? Article like, article ID. So here we have to make a post request to this URL. Right? And now we are going to use something called fetch, which is like AJAX way of doing the events. Here is the fetch API. You can go through the details of it. It's straightforward and easy to use, so you don't have to worry too much. Let me just show how it works. So you could do just okay, here I'm calling fetch, I'm giving it an URL, and then what happens after the submission? I get a response or an error. If I get a response, I'm printing the response. If I get an error, I'm getting the error. Now only problem is I don't have access to article ID here. I have to get an article ID for which article I've clicked the thumbs up icon or the like icon, right? To do that, I have to get article ID somehow. So what we could do is we could attach an article ID to this I or this icon, right? So using something called data attributes. You can read about data attributes on MDN Web Docs page, where you can attach data attributes to any of the HTML tags, and then access it using data set, array, as like an array or a dictionary rather, or object. So let's attach data dash article underscore ID equal to, here we are going to set up, we are going to put article ID. That's done by like from Jinja getting article ID, right? Okay, I think this should be set up. Let's just check. You can always check how it's there, going inspecting and checking the HTML. Right, it's setting properly. You can check the next one here by right clicking, say article ID 2. Correct. Now this is set up. How do we access this article data attribute in JavaScript? So we have an event raised, and we can get the target of the event, which means which element was the source of this event. So that's done by event.target. So what you could do is article icon is equal to event.target, right? So we get the target icon, or we can just call it article instead of article icon, just to be clear. Now to get an article ID, we can get it from this article by article dot dataset dot article ID, right? Now, because that's what we have set up in the as a data attribute. You can see in this page, to access these attributes, columns or index number or parent, you have to do whatever that main node is, dot dataset dot actually data attribute. We don't use this part, we use only the rest of it. So we could just get that. Similarly, we'll get article ID, and then we pass article ID. Then we just do console.log response. We can even do alert. Let's do alert. And then if there is an error, we're going to print error. So let's see now what happens when we send. Server is running. Refresh. Now let's keep the console clear and open here, just in case if there is errors, we can see it. Okay, it's sending, we're getting a response, some response, but I can see that there's some error here. It's saying article like rating /1. That's not correct. I think in our controller we given article like /article ID. There's no rating part involved, so this is not required. Okay, now let's refresh again. Okay, we're getting a response. If you check our network, you can see the fetch was made and the response was there. Response was okay, and you can see here article with article 1 ID 1 was liked. Now instead of showing that, I want to show something better. I want to show thank you message just below. That's done by creating a node div with the message and then inserting the div here, right? You can check manipulating the DOM, how we insert DOM elements, how do we create like an element and then insert it, right? So let's do here create a DOM element called div element. Right, and add a class message. We don't need to add, and the message, thank you for liking. Right, we can show this as part of this once the response is successful. Otherwise we don't want to show it, so we can add it directly here or show it as a separate thing. So for example, we can show so now instead of this we can just call that, right, show thank you and send response to it. So now show thank you will create a div called div and then class of message and div HTML. But one thing that we have missed is we need to add this to an article, right? We need to add it after the article. After the article isn't after this node. After this node, we want to add it below it. So that's done by appending the div. That will be like this. Right, article dot append div, appending at the bottom of that thing. So now to do that we have to send article to this, so I have to not only send response or to send article to. So let's try and do that. Right, let's refresh this, go to console, click this, say here thank you for liking, just came quickly. You can go to network and see it's been submitted here, and then you can also see that it was like. You can try for one more, like let's go here and try for this. Right, we get thank you for liking. You can see article 5 was liked and OK was sent, and you can see article 5 was liked. Similarly, etc, etc. It keeps, we can do many such things. So what we are doing here is we are creating a DOM and then just adding the to this below this, right? And one thing to make sure is we are appending it. We can append as a child, and child might have an on click of the same thing. So we might add it below it as not as a child. Probably create another div element of message and then add set to it. For example, you don't need to do this. You can actually want to show on the top for thank you. You can actually create here instead of this. You can add an ID here and then add it to this P instead of adding to this, right? So that it's a separate thing and it's not a child of the eye icon. Right, because if it's child of an eye icon, as you can see, if I click that also, it will get liked again. So instead of child of this eye icon, you can make it child parent of that, which will be P, and then add it to things. You can do that. Get the you can actually get the parent. Parent node. See, and then you can add to that. Let's try and do that. Instead of article dot parent node dot child, right? Instead of article dot. So when I do refresh now, when I click on that, it comes. Now if I click on this, it won't happen, right? But if I click on this, one more happens, right? You can send someone. But here it's added at the same level because it's added to the parent of this, so it becomes a sibling of this, right? Because they are all nodes. Okay, that's all actually. What we learned today is actually how to do some validation, how to do some submission, how to use fetch to do submission, and how to do DOM manipulation to add some node to show the message in place so that we can respond to the user. Now this looks faster and cleaner for the user, right? And there are many other ways to use JavaScript too, because it's a whole big field in itself, because it's a language, it's a platform, it has so many other frameworks involved. You can actually build a whole application in just one page, called single page applications. But here we are actually fitting certain parts of the JavaScript into an existing project or into a Flask project, where we want certain features and not all the features. You can also use certain other frameworks like Vue framework or a React framework, which all work on creating the UI dynamically in the JavaScript to make it fast and reactive for the user. Some of them are straightforward and easy, like Vue, much straightforward and can retrofit easily, and React, which is in itself is a huge framework and platform to use. Similarly, Vue is also like a huge platform and framework in itself to use. Both are very advanced. If you want to self-learn, you can learn them, or you can do a lot of stuff by just using standard JavaScript or ECMAScript and writing JavaScript directly. Either way, I think there is enough value in learning JavaScript to do certain user related work. Thank you so much for watching. Bye bye.